You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right, we're joined by a shot of Canton as we get closer to the election, but fear not, next Tuesday on election night, we're going to do a live show from 6 Eastern to 1 Eastern, 1 a.m. Eastern. That's 3 to 10 Pacific. We've got some special guests lined up, and we'll be talking about the transportation-focused election returns from around the country. So if you want to join us, go to youtube.com/theoverheadwire. We'll be streaming live on YouTube, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. We'll be streaming it live from my channel, and I think it'll be a good time. You know, I know we won't be able to completely ignore the general election as it's important to transportation policy, but we're hoping to just hang out, have some fun, maybe have some drinks, and just kind of hang out there. Hopefully, I think I can set up a chat room, so there'll be a chat room on there so people can comment. We'll have commenters as well. I've gotten a number of guests already lined up for that whole time. So we're just going to be chatting, having fun, having a good time. And yeah, it should be a blast. So the last two Mondays at the Overhead Wires have been me with Han Solo, but we're going to make up for that next Tuesday when the election night comes around. So we're still working on the details. And so if you want to learn more, just watch my Twitter account. I'll probably pin it as a pinned tweet at the top of my Twitter account, and I'll probably post it on my newsletter too. So if you haven't posted or if you haven't signed up for the newsletter already, you can do so by going to theoverheadwire.com, and you can sign up for a 2-week trial. Or if you've signed up before and signed off, feel free to get the basic version. Just sign back up again, and we'll hook you up. So yeah, let's get to it. This is episode 73. Shut-ins Anonymous 101 is in session. Before we get to the news, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. So thanks to folks to subscribe to the through the podcatchers. We really appreciate it. It's awesome that you keep coming back to the show. We really, really, really do appreciate it. It's awesome that you guys keep coming back and downloading the show each week. The Talking Headway show as well as the Monday show. So you can get both of them on the same feed, which I don't know if many other podcasts, they're single operators. We got 2. We're super psyched about that. Also, if you've gone back in the last couple of weeks, there's been some really great episodes on Talking Headways. So go check those out if you haven't got a chance. Coming up this Thursday, we've got Sarah Hendren talking about her book, What a Body Can Do. And, it's been really great to have these authors on to talk about all the stuff that they're writing about. We had Anthony Townsend on last week to talk about his book, Ghost Road, which I highly, highly recommend if you haven't gotten a chance to check it out. He dove in deep on the subject of autonomous vehicles, as he's not a fan of the word autonomous vehicle, but, it's in the title of the book. So, but yeah, it's totally interesting to talk to him about that subject, and I hope folks can get a chance to go back to listen to that episode because it's pretty great. So I guess we should just get into it, shouldn't we? Yeah, let's do that. We have a couple of items here this week. It's not going to be a super long episode, but we have a couple of items that are of interest that I thought would be worth sharing with folks from the last 2 weeks of news. Again, if you want to sign up for the newsletter to get these in advance, to read them, the articles that we have, these are some of the best ones from the last 2 weeks. This one specifically, this first one, was one of the most read items of the last 2 or 3 weeks, actually, because it's so popular. So let's get going, shall we? So in 2017, the average age of the 11 members Charlotte City Council went from 61 to 45 years old. But while they came in with high hopes, now they can't seem to get along. The problem seems to be that the council breaks along 2 lines, not by party, but by the establishment and the political newcomers, and how they feel about politics of office versus actually governing a city. So I've been talking about this subject for a bit now as something that interests me, but there's a growing split in cities these days that's growing between the left and the lefter, or left and leftist, or center left and left, or progressive and left, or whatever it's called. And in this instance, specifically in Charlotte, it's newcomers versus establishment. We talk about these left versus lefter, and people say, well, that's just San Francisco, or that's just so-and-so. But I've seen it in Austin because of the transit election that's coming up. We see it here in Charlotte with the newcomers and the establishment, the older guard. And these are pretty liberal places. So it's interesting to see this kind of like clash between the two. And I think we're seeing that at the national level too. You see the establishment versus, the party machinations of a centrist left versus the progressive left, or whatever you want to call them. I still think progressive is a weird term for some of the folks that don the name progressive, but whatever, we'll get past that. But I think a lot of the problems come from not from these general ideas, but having to politic or implement those ideas. The idea of doing something is pretty easy in general, but not everyone agrees about how to do it, and thus actually governing comes into play. And, it's like here in San Francisco, everybody wants housing, but they all have different ways that they want to try to achieve it. There are some people that don't want anything, which doesn't make any sense to me. But for the most part, I think the factions in the city want more housing. It's just how you get there. So everyone is fighting instead of how to actually come up with a compromise solution. And I think we see this in this interesting quote that the author actually had, Michael Graff, had in the piece. And he says, the conversation I had with them not only revealed who was where, but also something that's more and more true of modern politics. Two groups can be part of the same conversation and come away with two different descriptions of how events take place and who was at fault. So I thought this was really interesting. And thinking about how people have kind of similar ideas about what they want to get done, whether it's housing or transportation, but different ways of thinking about how to get there, and then who was at fault if it didn't actually happen or not. So I thought this piece was interesting, all about Charlotte, all about kind of this newcomer class of city council members thinking about how to govern and whether they want to govern or not, or whether they want to get there. They have these ideas about what they want to do. They were elected for a certain reason, but then having to compromise with other members of council to try to get, what they wanted to get done. Really fascinating. So anyways, yeah, that's that. And I highly recommend going to read that. Charlotte Agenda has actually had some really good pieces lately. The items that have been in that website have been really good. Next up, residents of Helsinki, Finland, the world's northernmost capital city, are changing the way they look at sustainability, making it a guiding principle rather than just a concept. In fact, new developments must integrate features that allow inhabitants to enjoy an extra hour of free time each day. The time-saving design includes a smartphone app that calls an elevator, apps that will order groceries, pneumatic tubes for trash, and no more than 300 meters from a free daycare center. So this project is called the Kalasatama District. It's about 430 acres, and it'll eventually be home to about 25,000 residents and office space for about 10,000 workers. Within about a few years, the Kalasatama is expected to have about 8 skyscrapers from 32 to 37 floors in height. And yeah, so there's this whole district in Helsinki, and where they're building out. It's close to downtown, so it's pretty popular. And one of the buildings actually is a co-housing project where the costs were jointly financed by a group of about 70 people or so, who until the process began had been strangers, but they came in together actually to help the developer design this building for them. And so they called the building Sumpi, or Finnish for let's have coffee, or small fish. Our Finnish friends who are listening, I know there are a number of you out there. Please correct me if I'm wrong on how to say this. Sumppi, Sumpi, I think. This was really fascinating to me. Basically, the folks got a chance to be a part of the design of this building, and they put in some really great sustainability features in there. So they decided to cancel the planned wine cellar for solar panels. They have a geothermal heating system, and all the windows have 3 panes for energy efficiency. The building has underground parking, but there are less spaces than there are units. And, in the article, they say in one of the first meetings, they actually, debated whether to purchase 3 or 4 electric car share cars so that they could share instead of everybody having to own a car. So I thought that was interesting too. Just the idea of of thinking about development from the standpoint of people coming together to develop a home together, rather than just a developer building it and then kind of releasing it into the open, and then whoever comes about it and purchases into this building is something of interest. It's kind of for me, it's kind of the anti-NIMBY discussion, anti-NIMBY project even. You have a lot of projects here in the U.S. where before there are even inklings of interest from actual residents, the negativity and the animosity starts right away from people who live around the project. And that's partly because people just don't like change. But what I like about this idea and having people buying into a building to influence it beforehand is that the developer knows exactly who's buying in. And they can design and ask real questions of actual real future residents. And I think many times we dismiss future residents too much in favor of the "I've been here first" or "I've been here longer" crowd. And I think that this is really interesting. And just the idea of sustainability as something that's basically not just from a concept idea, like I said in the intro, but from that idea of guiding principles, making it so that it's an important part of the design process, sustainability, and designing so that you can save people an hour a day, and that being extra sustainability. I think that's a really important kind of way to frame it. Your time is finite. Saving yourself a day a year for 365 days, that's 365 hours that you have to do other things, whatever that might be, and calming your mind, etc. So I really like this article. It was in the New York Times. It was written by Dorn Townsend, and talking about this development project and the idea of sustainability as a time-saving measure. So designing buildings to help people manage their time better, which is a function of sustainability that I hadn't heard talked of very much. All right, next up, pollution affects future health. This was in The Guardian by Damian Carrington. Researchers have found in Mexico City that abundant pollution nanoparticles found in the brainstems of young people are closely associated with proteins common with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases. The small metallic particles match those released through brake dust and internal combustion processes. We know pollution affects all of us, but this could lead to a greater understanding of how pollution leads to these types of diseases. It also pushes back on the idea that certain levels of pollution are okay, like what is being pushed by the EPA's political appointees. So I don't know how much folks are familiar with this argument, but there's some folks in the EPA who are political appointees who believe that there's an acceptable amount of air pollution. And I think we've learned from the pandemic that with the blue skies and all the stuff happening with the wildfires and stuff like that, and even now in Colorado, there's been a couple. But with all that, I think it's important that we understand that pollution is not okay at all. We need, we might not get to zero pollution, but it would be very beneficial to us and the planet if we actually did. And part of the reason why is that, these types of findings that come about when researchers are looking into the details, and for this specific instance, they found that children who had died and they looked at the particles in their brainstems, they found that these are more likely to form the proteins that have the potential to cause Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. So, basically the research, and I'll go through this in kind of a detail, but basically the researchers found abundant nanoparticles in the brainstems of 186 young people in Mexico City who had died suddenly between the ages of 11 months and 27 years. They are likely to have reached the brain after being inhaled into the bloodstream or via the nose or gut. So the researchers said that by studying children, they were also able to cut out other causes of dementia, such as alcohol usage, which is tied specifically to that disease. These findings, among many others, are kind of the ultimate reason why we need to reduce VMT and pollution, not just from oil and gas, but also brake dust and plastic particles. There was another study actually that was in The Guardian as well this week, maybe it was even yesterday, that linked pollution, specifically nitrous oxide, to a 38% increase of depression and anxiety, along with other mental health issues. So this ties into the neurodegenerative diseases too. I mean, all this stuff we're inhaling, whether it's nanoparticles, microparticles, anything else, it gets into our bloodstream, it gets into our gut, it gets into our brainstem, it gets into our brains, and eventually it'll affect us deeply in one way or another. These studies that come out they kind of point to this thing that has been, I think, bothering people for a long time. This pollution, whether it's from industry, whether it's from automobiles, those types of things, it really gets to you and your health. And I realize people need to get around. I know we've designed cities around automobiles, and it's hard to change away from our urban form. But these studies keep coming out, and they're pretty damning. We keep connecting these dots, and yet inertia keeps pulling us forward. Electric cars are seen as this panacea, but metallic particles still come from brake dust, and they still get into the brainstem. Rubber is getting put into our food supply through water. We're finding billions and billions of microplastic particles in just the San Francisco Bay. So I think we need to think harder about how to fix some of these issues related to transportation and the policy around pollution. And, the EPA saying that some level of pollution is okay is not okay. We should get it down to as low as we possibly can, just to, if anything, save ourselves from all of these ailments or even the potential of these ailments. I mean, some people won't get them because of genes or because of luck or whatever, but then there's a whole group of people that are susceptible to this. So it's something that we need to focus on and need to think about. And I will say that this week on Talking Headways, we're going to be joined, I think I mentioned earlier, we're going to be joined by Sarah Hendren to talk about the connections between design and disability. And she actually visited the dementia town in the Netherlands that was set up for patients suffering from the disease. There's a town there basically that was set up as a real place, designed like a real place, but for people who are losing their memories, who are losing their ideas of their self and where they are, wandering around a town that is designed like a town is much more human centered than, say, putting somebody in a home that's not really well designed, or it's very cold, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And this comes up in the conversation that Sarah and I have, in that, the people that designed the initial place for dementia patients, they, after a few years, they decided that these were not places that they would put their own family members. These are not places that they want their own family members to be, which is how they came up with the Dementia Village, which I know that most of you have probably read about in something in Fast Company or in City Lab or something along those lines, because we talked about it a number of times. But she actually went there, and we talked about it a bit. It's in her book, and so I think that's really, really fascinating. So I hope people get a chance to listen to the show on Thursday. Sarah is coming on and talking about that, among many other things about disability, which is a really fascinating subject, and I hope it opens some people's minds. That book, her book, What a Body Can Do, definitely has opened my mind to all this stuff. It's been great. Okay, next up, the path to transport is through progressive cities and states. Yona Freemark, Transport Politic. So while everyone will be watching national election results with bated breath, it is the state and local elections that are more likely to determine our transportation futures. And in order to make a great impact on issues like climate change, local governments need to make more progressive choices than they have in the past. So I did this as just a plug for Yona's piece, because I think it's really powerful, and that it talks about how local and state governments really do affect our lives more intensely even than, say, federal policy. In federal policy, I love it. Obviously, it's important. I think so, because there's so much stuff that goes on, from transit funding to block grants to funding through housing, et cetera, things we can do, and especially through federal policy, HUD and FTA and all those things. But all these local elections that we're going to be having in the next few days, and I think this is probably the case in a lot of the United States, that a lot of the ballot measures and the tax increases and stuff that we're having, these are the things that are going to affect people personally. So I think it's really important to have that discussion about what is important, and how important is federal policy versus local policy, and how progressive can local policies actually be. You see lots of cities who are planning with big ideas, and then other cities who are just kind of like rolling along and letting the state DOT determine their future. So I think this is interesting from Yona's perspective. I think folks should go check it out. Obviously, it's on the Transport Politics site. And hopefully folks will join us on Tuesday for election night on our YouTube stream. Like I said, it's going to be tons of fun. We'll talk about this specific topic, federal policy. Maybe we can even convince Yona to come on and talk about this stuff too. So we'll see. And finally, Elon Musk's silly season continues. This is in TechCrunch. Las Vegas officials agreed to allow Elon Musk's Boring Company to build a people mover that could connect attendees of conferences at the convention hall with other parts of the campus and parking lots. They agreed because the bid was cheaper, but they are now coming to the realization that the project won't be able to carry as many passengers as they had specified. Okay, who saw this coming? I think we all did. Anybody who listens to this podcast anyways. So Las Vegas Convention Center wanted a loop that could carry about 4,400 passengers per hour. And this is insanely small when you compare it to like subways and other things. And it's insanely small when you consider it's actually the Consumer Electronics Show as well, which often brings about 170,000 visitors to town in January every year. I've been a couple times. It's a massive conference. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's super crazy. There's so many people there. There's so many people wandering around in all the hotels. Getting there one year, I was invited by Here Technologies to go to CES to check out what they were doing. And we tried to get there by taking a taxi, and it's just silly. They really do need a transportation system that can carry lots and lots of visitors, because driving around in a car to get to these places is just, it's silly and ridiculous. But the Boring Company's loop will only carry, instead of 4,400 passengers that the Las Vegas Convention Center requested, it'll only carry about 1,200 people per hour, according to documents that TechCrunch showed on their page. And if they fail to hit the targets, they won't receive the $13 million in funding. So it was smart of the Las Vegas Convention Center to write this kind of contract that made the Boring Company responsible for any types of underachievement that they got. But as I think about this, I'm also thinking that maybe Elon is just using this as advertising. I mean, if they lost $13 million on the deal, who knows, how much they would have spent on advertising anyways. And then also people are going to be talking about it, right? They'll be talking about how they're going to CES and riding in a Tesla. And I guess all media coverage is good, right? But this whole thing points to the fact that he's been selling this subway, and the idea of getting in Tesla cars as like this savior and this alternative to subways, when it's really not. It's just not. You can carry way more people on a subway. Subways have 10-car trains. You can get 1,000 people in a single subway car versus versus the 1,200 people per hour that they're going to carry on these Tesla vehicles inside of this Boring Company vehicle, this Boring Company tunnel. So, I don't know. This all points to me to the fact that Elon has no idea what he's doing. They're not making tunneling cheaper by ignoring safety precautions. And he even said himself, "We simplified this a lot. It's basically Teslas in tunnels at this point." That was his direct quote. So you think, I don't know. Elon drives me crazy. He annoys me because, just like some other people in this world at the moment, he's kind of just like a carnival barker. And while he might have done a couple of good things in terms of hiring really smart people to send stuff into space, he keeps on like boasting this crazy ideas that aren't ready for prime time. And so saying that you're going to make tunneling cheaper by using a tunnel boring machine that was bought from somewhere else and not adding any of the safety precautions, and that makes it cheaper, that's just lying. That's all it is. And it drives me crazy. And I don't understand the constant lying, especially when people have been calling him out on this forever. So it's just like, when I saw the article, I was just like rolled my eyes, because I was like, well, you finally figured this out, TechCrunch? You finally figured out that it wasn't going to carry as many people as he promised, especially people have been pointing this out for years and years and years about how, running Teslas and vehicles through tunnels doesn't really work. I mean, this is his whole idea, because he was stuck in traffic on the 405 one day. It was like, well, what if I could get my rich ass in a tunnel? Which is, what all rich people do. They're like, well, what if I came up with a solution for me? It doesn't matter about all those other people. What about just me? And so that's the basis of all this stuff. It's all just like solutions for him. He just wanted to get to work without having to deal with traffic. And so he'd built a tunnel for his individual car versus actual things that work for everybody, like a subway system. So anyways, this annoys me, but I wanted to bring it up because I thought, finally people are starting to see this. It won't change any of the people's minds who support him through everything, but it might convince some people that they shouldn't be partnering with him to do some of these things unless they actually get some documents that show that they're going to do what they actually say they're going to do. All right. Well, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without you. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We really do. I really appreciate you all for listening and supporting. You guys are awesome. So and you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, so we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers, and $10 a month will get you a bus-only scarf. And all the $2 a month also is a handwritten note. So I've sent a number of those out this week. I've sent a number of scarves out this week. So I was, it's pretty good that you all are continuing to support the show and like the scarves too. It's almost winter time, so I hope people can go out and get them. We've only got about 45 or so left, 40 or so left scarves. So order them while they're still available. They're going soon. And if you want one of the scarves without being a $10 a month Patreon supporter, you can get them by going to theoverheadwire.com and clicking on the scarf square. And also, finally, I want to mention that we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice, if you want to get your hands on one of those. If you go to raymondunwin.com, you can download the book on Awsound, and it downloads as a podcast, basically. So each chapter is a different podcast episode. So that's really cool, and they've done a great job, and people have really liked what they've heard, which I'm really happy about. So check it out if you get a chance. I know it's a book from 1909, but I think it's still really illuminating about what's going on today. There's so many parallels to what's going on today with globalization and what they were talking about with regionalization down back in the early 1900s. So check that out if you get a chance. RaymondUnwin.com. All right. So also, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. So finally, here we are, Puppies and Butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. Okay, so I'm going to make an admission here. I broke down and I got a haircut. My hair was getting really, really out of control. It was long. It was down to my chin. And so the person I've gone to for haircuts for the last 15 years messaged and asked if I wanted to get a haircut. And I was a little bit nervous about it. So I said, oh, well, is it possible you can come by the house and we could do it in the backyard, and because I didn't want to go to the salon. And she said, sure. So she came by the house. We did it outside of my back deck with masks on the whole time, and we took all the precautions we needed to and got it done. So now my hair actually is back to normal again. But I do worry a lot about my friends here in the city whose businesses who have been rocked by these restrictions and the amount of lockdown that we've had to have and the amount of fear that people have by going into places of business. It doesn't quite seem fair that they should suffer more than the others because of the nature of their industry being close to people. And by that, I'm not saying that we need to open up like crazy, because I know that we need to be safe and make sure that we take all the precautions, wear our masks, make sure that we're not, having these huge gatherings and things like that. But I also think that we should have been giving people money to deal with the downtime instead of just letting them hang, letting them suffer from all these precautions that we all need. But at the same time, people's livelihoods are at stake too. And I think the PPPs helped, but I fear that many businesses we all love will be gone. And so, I think part of the reason why I wanted to get a haircut was because I needed one, but also I think because I wanted to support a friend. So, I think making sure that we take all the precautions that are necessary, making sure that we're all taking care of each other. I know we're getting the winter months. I know where the caseloads are getting higher. I know it's kind of maddening to, day after day, keep on staying home and watching Netflix and trying to keep yourself entertained, but, keep hanging in there, because we need to keep the cases from going up, skyrocketing again, which it looks like they might be. And finally, make sure you get out and vote on Tuesday here in the United States. I know a lot of you folks are out there are listening from other countries and maybe entertained by this whole election business and how much we spend on elections and all the crazy stuff that happens during elections. But I just want to, make sure that if you haven't voted already and you live in the United States and you're eligible to vote, please do so. Please go out and do it. I voted a couple weeks ago. As soon as I got my ballot, I got it and sent it back. It's already been registered by the county of San Francisco. So I hope that folks can get there. And if you're in a state like Wisconsin, make sure to not mail the ballot, but just drop it off at any polling place. The Supreme Court is already messing stuff up, and make sure you guys get your votes in. Go to the polling place. If you have absentee ballot, don't mail it. Just go and drop it off at a polling place, or whatever rules are in place for your county. Let's make sure we keep up with democracy. Okay. So without all that being said, it's also Halloween this weekend. Enjoy it. Watch some Food Network, watch some pumpkin carving, watch some my favorite show actually is the Garfield Halloween special. I think it was from like 1985 with the pirate ghosts. That's a really good one. It's on YouTube, so you can find it if you have, if you're missing some of the, I think Charlie Brown, it's a great pumpkin. Charlie Brown has been taken off of the air, and it's because it's on Apple Plus or something like that. But I like the Garfield Halloween special, so check that out if you get a chance. So yeah. You can find me online on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. Also, make sure you can, if you want to, you can email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous Patreons for supporting this week's podcast. Don't forget on election night to join us on youtube.com/theoverheadwire. We'll have a live show, and it'll be tons of fun. We'll see you next week.
Talk